Take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there, who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air, you know what's in the air. It's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility, it's possibility.
So Andrew Schulz did an interview with the New York Times. They've got like a podcast interview series called The Interview, hosted by David Marchese, a real journalist who is interviewing essentially a podcaster, also a comedian. But, you know, the dynamic of this conversation, which is emerging in multiple sort of media instances, is a career journalist is talking to a sort of knucklehead podcaster and trying to figure out why the knucklehead podcaster has so much bigger of an audience. They seem to wield so much less responsibility and yet so much bigger of an audience. And so I think there's a public interest for these journalists in you know, pursuing these guys, trying to figure out how they're so influential and why their mind works the way it does, etc. But also, I think they're kind of just curious about why these guys' format works so much better than theirs. And there's even hints of jealousy. You saw this in like the CNN interview with Tim Dillon, where these journalists are kind of trying to figure out, like, why is it that you can do so much less work and reach so many more people and have so much bigger of an impact? And aside from the slight jealousy, I think it's also just an interesting question, right? And so that's kind of the focus of this interview here. I think the main thing that's on display here is just how little responsibility a guy like Andrew Schulz actually takes. And I think that's clear at this point, but it is funny to watch them sort of wiggle around a little bit and defend this format that does seem to be working better, right? This idea of a long form podcast where it's not as adversarial as journalism is sort of supposed to be, at least when you're talking to like high stakes political figures, but rather it's just a conversation. And that's the point that Schulz makes in this interview, is that that's why people like it, is because people want to hear a conversation where you're showing genuine curiosity and not necessarily just trying to get a gotcha out of people. And I do think because of sort of TV journalism and the entertainment aspect of news, a lot of journalism has become more of a gotcha. So it's either like super softball or it's like, I'm trying to get a clip of you looking like you don't know what to say. And I do think people catch on to the fact that that's kind of phony. And so the podcast format appeals to people because it makes them come off as more human. However, it is really fascinating to see that Andrew Schulz really has no understanding of what a journalist is supposed to do at all, and simultaneously pontificates that he might be one of the foremost journalists of his time, which he says kind of as a joke, but also you see the egotism there, and you see the fact that, like, this is a guy who's smart enough to grasp that what he's doing has a big impact, and maybe even that there's some responsibility that comes with it, but he's just not really willing to incorporate that. Why? Because it would make his job harder. So anyway, let's watch a little bit.
So let's take the example of your interview with Donald Trump. I know that you're not a journalist.
Correct. But am I not? I might be the foremost political journalist.
It's possible. It's possible.
Like, what makes somebody that? It's such a... You know, when Joe is bringing somebody on, he's only bringing them on to ask him things that he's curious about.
Yeah.
He's not going, I have to ask him these questions to make sure the interview is balanced so that my audience doesn't think that I was doing a puff piece, whatever. So what I think is people prefer in general more genuine conversations, which is more curiosity-based conversations, instead of, I already know how I feel about you, and I'm going to prove to my audience that I'm right the way I feel about you. And I think what happens to that is, yeah, your audience that agrees with you will like it, but you can't bring everybody in.
Because they're like our rules and expectations.
That, what are some? I'd love to know. Like, what do you feel?
Well, there's
encumbered.
The most obvious one would be like language rules.
Sure.
You know, certain words you can't say, or there's even just sort of like an implicit style of conversation. that I feel like I'm supposed to have, that is actually like inhibiting a little bit in a conversation with you. And I'm feeling that in this conversation because it's like, there's ways to talk with you that I think are actually, they're just made more difficult because it's like, I know there's sort of a little voice on my shoulder.
Yeah.
But
I think what happened is the Democrats, I think, were, and I hate to make this so like Democrat Republican because it's not all Democrats, by the way. I think that some Democrats are quite critical of this. You've seen obviously Bernie, you see AOC, but I think what happens is the Democrats are like tied to the same, corporations that are funding the Republicans, and they can't actually push back against those corporations because they get so much funding from them. And in order to really make it a class war, which you should, because that's honestly the thing that's going to resonate with the most people, they can't do it because they're in the pockets of, pharmaceutical companies, they're in pockets of the medical industrial complex, just like Republicans are as well. So what they have to do is they made it an identity politics issue. And I think that was unrelatable, probably.
You're talking so intelligently about sort of the Democratic challenge right now, but I was watching your appearance on the trigonometry podcast, and you know the quote I'm going to bring up, right?
This is so disingenuous, but go on. This is so like,
you'll tell me why it's disingenuous, but for people who do
so it's like, this is the exact example of the Rorschach test. But go on.
Yeah,
it's like,
where you're talking about politics, you were talking about how you were Democrat and they sort of lost you.
No, I'll give it to you if you want.
Yeah, do it. Yeah.
Okay, so when I was younger, Democrats were cool as hell. Bill Clinton is playing the sax on Arsenio. He's smoking weed. You're like, oh, these guys are cool. Like, they embraced homosexuality. I grew up in New York City. Like, I understand, like, the importance of the gay community and, like, making this an awesome place. You're like, oh, yeah, the Republicans are just, like, some Southern racists. That's kind of what you thought. And then Republicans at the time were like, don't say bad words. Hip-hop is bad. Rock and roll music is dangerous. They're, like, finger-wagging, right? They're telling you what to do. Now, Trump's got 3 baby mamas. And I go, and the Democrats are saying what words we can't say. You can't say, retard, or you can't say this. Like, you're policing speech, and the Republicans are like, yo, say whatever you want. You got to do it. And I'm like, wow, look at this shift in terms of the parties. Did the people move at all, or have the parties moved?
Yeah.
And I go, and I say this thing. I'm being purposely reductive because I'm a comedian talking to comedians. And I'm like, yeah, so I'm going to vote. The guy who gets 3 baby moms, so I'm voting for the guy who's getting more pussy or something like that.
Yeah.
I get how anybody who saw it out of the context of the conversation was like, this guy is an idiot. Yeah. Like, you voted for somebody because they get laid. But at the same time, it's like, do you really think that was, like, at a certain point in time, can we afford even like a modicum of intelligence to the person saying something? Like, do you think that's the point I was actually trying to demonstrate?
Yeah, so a couple interesting things going on here. First of all, you got Schulz, kind of bragging that he could be the foremost journalist of his time. I think he knows that's not true, but I think also there's a part of him. I think Schulz is really enjoying being sort of enmeshed in the political world, even though it's overwhelming and you get accused of all kinds of shit, and he's arguably not very good at it, but he, I think, genuinely enjoys trying to like think his way through these things, and he likes that these are relevant topics and that talking to politicians has made him more relevant. And so I think when he says, I could be the foremost journalist of his time, there's a part of him that is kind of entertaining that and wants that to be true. But then he goes on to say, well, so tell me some of these rules of journalism. Who's to say who's a journalist and who's not? Like, what does that even mean? And it is genuinely fascinating to watch this actual journalist have to kind of patiently explain what journalism is to somebody who, like I said, has a much bigger platform. It's almost like, the guy who knows what he's doing is being outran and lapped in the same job by a guy who has no fucking idea what he's doing and like has never even looked into it at all. And I guess that's just the state of where we're at with things, which is why we have no choice but to kind of entertain this idea that this casual style of engaging with politics seems to be getting people somewhere. It seems to be making politicians who weren't that relevant more relevant than they were. You know, politicians have gone on Joe Rogan's podcast like RFK Jr. and like way expanded their platform. Even Bernie Sanders, you could say that's the case. And so like in some cases, these podcasters give politicians a shot that they might not have had without, because it's just a lot of reach and it displays them in a certain type of context. And then, you know, he makes some sort of good points about Democrats there and how, you know, they're tied to the same companies as Republicans. Not the most profound observation. But then I think the conclusion that he lands on, that Democrats made it too much about identity politics, is a misread. And he kind of contradicts that later when he's defending himself about other comments he made, because he said Democrats used to be cool because they embraced gay people and defended gay people. And so really what he's talking about with Democrats and identity politics is the same thing. It's an extension of the same thing. And I guess the only thing that I could say is that over the years, I think Democrats have branded themselves that way, and that made it easier to attack them on that basis in the 2024 election. And perhaps Kamala Harris was particularly vulnerable to that because she's been wishy-washy on this stuff over the years. She said comments that made her look bad on issues of gender and stuff to the right, like, you know, way before this election even happened. And so, you know, in the absence of a stronger messenger to kind of carry the conversation in a different way, even though Kamala Harris wasn't talking that much about gender and identity politics, the election was successfully framed that way by Republicans. So that's kind of what a guy like Schulz misses here, is that he kind of got okey-doked by Republicans. They're the ones who made it about identity politics. But admittedly, Democrats kind of made themselves vulnerable to that over the years by not focusing as much on the economic issues that have come to define politics and even defined how Donald Trump was able to pull off 2 wins. But then my favorite part of this interview is the part at the end where David brings up comments that Schulz made recently about how Republicans are cooler and they're the cooler party. And I think I covered this. I either covered this or I covered similar comments that he made on a different podcast, but I'm pretty sure it was the same one, where he says this whole spiel about how Democrats used to be cool, but now Republicans are more cool because the president has baby mamas and he's fucking bitches and whatever. And he got thoroughly dragged for that because it sounds really stupid. And he even acknowledges here that it sounds stupid. When you play that back, it's a stupid thing that he's saying. However, I think what's most interesting about this is how negatively he reacts to that being brought up. And the thing that goes completely over his head here is that this moment is journalism. This is what he is missing, and the rest of the podcast guys are missing about journalism. This guy, David, who is a trained journalist, is bringing up something that Andrew Schulz has said in the past and comparing it with what he's saying now. That's called holding somebody to account. And the fact that it makes Andrew squirm a little bit here is the point. It shows that it works, and it also shows that it's good TV, it's good entertainment. This is why this is the method. Because you don't want to just let somebody say whatever they have to say at the moment that they think is going to be the best spin. You want to not just ask somebody difficult questions, but be able to hold them to things that they've said in the past and not let up, even if they try to wiggle away from you. That's what these podcast guys don't want to do, because they don't want to create what feels like a hostile environment. They don't want to make the rest of the interview tense. And, you know, Joe Rogan has kind of done that a couple times with guests, but for the most part, none of these guys do that. And it's not even the same kind of, listen, corporate media is guilty of a lot of the same thing, like kind of fluffy interviews that aren't very challenging. Lord knows that's how we ended up with Biden sleepwalking his way into trying to run for a second time. And so I think what happens on the corporate side, though, is that they have very established relationships with these politicians, and it's delicate, and they, in a very concerted way, want to keep and develop those relationships, where these podcast bros, they're just a little bit more like, kind of, they think it's cool. It's like JD Vance, the fucking vice president, the president wants to come on my podcast and talk to me. Why would I give him a hard time? Why would I make him angry? I want to talk to him. I'm curious, right? That's what Schulz says, is that it's about curiosity. So there's no doubt that there's something to that when it comes to the interview style. But it is fascinating to watch Schulz be confronted with actual journalism and be kind of held to account to something stupid that he actually said, and not be able, not only does he not like it, but he kind of recoils at it and says, this is so disingenuous. And I mean, there's the divide right there, because I can see why he calls it disingenuous, but at the same time, that's journalism. If you're not doing that, then you're not actually interrogating any of these characters, and they're taking advantage of you is the reality, whether they're on the left or the right. I'd rather left-wing politicians be taking advantage of an idiot like this than right-wing politicians. But if you're just having a politician with an agenda on your platform without asking them any tough questions, then yes, they're spinning their narrative off of you. That's just how this works. So I don't think there's any hope that these guys will ever figure that out. Like they say, you can't make a man understand something that his salary depends on him not understanding. But it is funny to watch, and we might as well try to get a couple clips off on these guys while they take over the media with racist jokes. But anyway, just real quick, couple more updates for you guys. It is election day in the New York City primary for mayor. So get out and vote for Zoran Mamdani. He has been surging in the polls, but it's still very uncertain how this whole thing is going to turn out. It all comes down to demographics and whether some of the people that might go vote for Cuomo stay home because of the heat. So if you're in New York and you haven't voted yet, get out there, vote for Zoran Mamdani number 1, Brad Lander number 2 if you want. Fill up your ballot and don't rank Cuomo at all. Leave Cuomo off your ballot. And if there's anybody else who's in New York, family, friends that you have, remind them, go out, vote for Zoran Mamdani. Your vote very much matters in this election, and Zoran winning this primary would be a huge victory. Doesn't mean he's going to be the mayor yet, but him beating Cuomo would be a huge step in the right direction. So let's make that happen. War in Iran is on pause, I suppose. We bombed some of their nuclear facilities. There was some confusion about whether the mission was successful at all, as if there's any way to really know that. There seems to be confusion about how Iran's nuclear systems and whatever their nuclear programs are, how any of it works in the first place. Certainly, whatever basis Trump is operating off of is completely different from the basis of intelligence that is understood, what we have and what we know about whether Iran is building nuclear bombs. All the intelligence says that's not happening, but Trump seems to have decided, maybe with the help of Benjamin Netanyahu, that it is. So Trump has announced a ceasefire. We know that in the case of Israel and Gaza, that lasted about a week or two. So we'll see what happens. If Trump really just, opened up war with Iran just to squash it, it would be classic Trump fashion. Depending on how this goes, that could continue to be what we see from Trump, is just constant creating of crises on purpose just to then reverse course, chicken out, and act like he solved the problem. So we'll see. Either Trump is going to drag us into an endless war in Iran that is not going to end well for anybody and is probably going to be a stain on many nations for a long time to come, or it's just going to be on to the next media cycle, and the same thing is going to happen next week and next week and next week. So at least let's start to identify this pattern. But I have a feeling that this business in Iran is not over. And finally, some more resistance to ICE raids going on. Just a couple examples to show you. Here is some people running ICE out of their neighborhood in Pasadena, which is in California. They basically were staying at a hotel, and I've shown this a couple times, people showing up to the hotels where ICE is staying and causing a ruckus, trying to get them to leave. So in this case, ICE left the facility, and that is the idea, is that you create enough of a problem for the hotel itself that they ask the feds to leave. So that seemed to have worked in this case. And the last video I'm going to play, I'm going to just end on this. This is a guy who decided to follow these masked ICE agents around because he saw them attacking and kidnapping people in his neighborhood. So he started following him. They came, tried to intimidate him into opening his window, which he refused to do. And this shows that you do not have to comply with these masked marauders. And another guy who's like a peace officer or something that's more of a local police officer and not one of these feds, then steps in at the end to try to de-escalate the situation. And I think that's pretty much the end of it. But another thing that you see from these ICE goons in this video is how they are filming. So this is something that I've seen from a lot of them, is that they film back because they want you to feel uncomfortable. So if you happen to be in a situation where you're filming ICE, understand you have the right to do that, and that's why they're pulling this move where they film you, because there's nothing else they can do, and they're just trying to unnerve you. So don't let them do it, and always film the police. Definitely film the feds. Definitely film ICE. And I'll see you guys later. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting different kinds of stuff there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main channel, book reviews, movie reviews. I'm reading Catcher in the Rye right now. I'm probably going to review that on there. Also posting music early. I've got a couple EPs out that were available first for members only. Right now, there's a couple tracks on there. There's a freestyle by me and my buddies Wrecked and Psych. So if you want access to all that, different podcasts and other stuff, become a member. And if there's other kinds of content that you'd like to see for members only stuff, then let me know and we'll work some things out.